My friends, today I want to tell you something powerful, something life-changing. God can transform your life in just 24 hours. I don't know what you're facing right now. Maybe you're carrying the weight of fear, doubt, or despair. Maybe the enemy has whispered in your ear telling you that you're stuck, that things will never change. But let me remind you, we serve a God of the impossible. When God moves, He doesn't need weeks, months, or years. He can change everything in an instant. Some of you have been waiting, praying, and believing for a breakthrough, and I want to tell you today, God can do it in 24 hours. What seems impossible to man is nothing for the Almighty. He is not limited by time, by circumstances, or by human understanding. When He speaks, mountains move. When He commands, storms are silenced. And when He reaches down, lives are transformed in a moment. You may be in a season where you feel stuck, like nothing is changing. You've tried everything, and it seems like the door just won't open. But I want to remind you, God is the God of sudden turnarounds. In the Bible, we see again and again how He steps in at just the right time. Joseph woke up one morning in prison and went to bed that night in a palace. One moment he was forgotten, and the next he was second in command over all of Egypt. That's the power of God. Think about the Israelites at the Red Sea. They were trapped, the enemy closing in behind them, nowhere to go. But in one moment, God split the waters, and they walked through on dry ground. That's how quickly He can make a way where there is no way. That's how suddenly He can shift your situation. Maybe today you're facing something that looks impossible, a financial struggle, a health crisis, a broken relationship, or a dream that seems out of reach. You've been waiting and you're wondering, God, when will it happen? I want to encourage you. Your moment is closer than you think. Just because you don't see anything happening doesn't mean God isn't working behind the scenes. He is setting things in place, lining up the right people, opening the right doors. And when the time is right, it will happen suddenly. God can turn your mourning into dancing in an instant. He can take what the enemy meant for harm and use it for good. One touch of His favor, one word from His mouth, and everything can change. But you have to believe it. You have to expect it. You have to stand in faith and say, God, I know You are able. I know my breakthrough is coming. I know my life is about to change. The enemy wants you to believe you're stuck, but you're not. God is a God of divine acceleration. What should take years, He can do in a day. What seems impossible, He can make possible in an instant. Your situation is not bigger than your God. Your struggle is not greater than His power. Get ready. Stay in faith, because in just 24 hours, God can step in, turn things around, and change your life forever. Throughout the Bible, we see time and time again how God moves suddenly. He is not slow in keeping His promises, and when He decides to act, everything changes in an instant. The world may say that change takes time, that breakthroughs require years of effort. But the Word of God shows us something different. When God speaks, miracles happen immediately. Look at Joseph. He was a man who had been betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and wrongfully imprisoned. For years, it seemed like his life was only getting worse. But in a single day, everything shifted. One moment, he was sitting in a dark prison cell, and the next he was standing before Pharaoh interpreting a dream. By the end of that day, he was promoted to the highest position in the land, second only to Pharaoh himself. That's how fast God can turn a life around. Think about the woman with the issue of blood. For 12 years she suffered. She spent all she had on doctors hoping for a cure, but nothing worked. She was weak, rejected, and out of options. But one encounter with Jesus changed it all. She reached out in faith, touched the hem of his garment, and immediately she was healed. Not gradually, not over time, immediately. That's the power of God at work. Consider Lazarus. He was dead for 4 days. His body had already begun to decay. The situation seemed hopeless, and those around him had given up. But when Jesus arrived and spoke his name, Lazarus didn't slowly come back to life. He walked out of that tomb at once. What others had written off as impossible, God reversed in a single moment. God doesn't need time. He needs faith. Over and over, we see in Scripture that when people believe, when they trust in his power, the impossible happens right before their eyes. The Red Sea didn't take weeks to part. It split in an instant when Moses lifted his staff. The walls of Jericho didn't fall after months of battle. They crumbled the moment God gave the command. Maybe you've been waiting for a breakthrough. Maybe you've been praying for a miracle, wondering when it will come. Let me tell you today, God can do it suddenly. One phone call, one opportunity, one divine connection, and everything can change. The same God who raised Lazarus, who healed the sick, who lifted Joseph from prison to power, is the same God working in your life right now. Don't give up. Don't lose heart. God is still in the business of sudden miracles. He is still opening doors. He is still healing. He is still setting captives free. And when the moment is right, when faith and God's perfect timing align, your breakthrough will come in an instant. Get ready, because the same power that worked then is working now. Your miracle is on the way. The enemy wants you to believe that your situation is permanent. He whispers lies, telling you that things will never change, that you'll always be stuck, that your past mistakes have locked you into a life of failure. But I came to tell you today, nothing is permanent when God steps in. The Bible is filled with stories of people who thought their fate was sealed, who believed their situation was hopeless, until God turned everything around. The enemy wants you to focus on what you see, but faith tells you to focus on what God can do. Look at Job. He lost everything: his family, his wealth, his health. His friends told him to give up. His own wife said, "Curse God and die." But Job refused to believe that his suffering was the end of the story. He held on to God, and because of his faith, God restored him. In a single moment, his fortune was reversed, and he received twice as much as he had lost. Think about the Israelites in bondage. For 400 years, they were slaves in Egypt. Generations were born and died in chains. It seemed like their fate was set in stone. But then God raised up a deliverer. In one night, they went from being slaves to being free. One moment they were under Pharaoh's rule, and the next they were walking toward the promised land. The situation that had defined them for centuries was changed in an instant by the power of God. And what about the blind beggar, Bartimaeus? He sat by the roadside day after day, begging for help. People passed him by. He was labeled forgotten, left to believe that blindness was his destiny. But when he heard that Jesus was near, he refused to stay silent. He cried out, and Jesus stopped. In that moment, his whole life changed. Jesus restored his sight, and he was never the same again. The enemy wants you to believe that what you're facing today is your final destination. He wants you to think that your mistakes, your failures, and your struggles define you. But I'm here to tell you, God has the final say. Your sickness is not permanent. Your financial struggle is not permanent. Your loneliness, your pain, your setbacks, they are not permanent. God is a God of new beginnings. He can rewrite your story in a moment. The very thing that has held you back for years can be removed overnight. The door that has been closed for so long can suddenly swing open. When God moves, everything shifts. So don't listen to the voice of doubt. Don't let fear keep you trapped in a situation that God is ready to change. Your season is shifting. What looked like the end is just the beginning of something greater. Trust in the Lord. Hold on to His promises and believe, because your situation is not permanent and your breakthrough is coming. Faith is the key that unlocks the power of God in your life. Without faith, miracles are missed. Without expectation, breakthroughs go unnoticed. All throughout the Bible, we see that faith is what moves the hand of God. It is not about how strong or talented you are, not about how much money or influence you have. It is about whether you believe that God can and will do what He has promised. There was a woman in the Bible who had been sick for 12 long years. She had spent everything she had trying to get better. Doctors couldn't help her. People had given up on her, but she heard about Jesus, and faith rose up in her heart. She didn't wait for an invitation. She didn't hesitate. She reached out and touched the hem of His garment. And in that moment, her faith made her whole. Jesus turned and said, "Daughter, your faith has healed you." It wasn't just the touch. It was her expectation that Jesus could change her situation. Think about the Roman centurion. His servant was sick, close to death, but he had unshakable faith. He told Jesus, "You don't even need to come to my house. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed." Jesus was amazed at his faith, and at that very moment, the servant was made well. Now, what if the woman had doubted? What if the centurion had hesitated? They would have missed their miracle. Faith is not just believing that God exists. It is believing that He is able, that He is willing, and that He is already working in your favor. Some people live their entire lives waiting for God to prove Himself before they believe. But faith doesn't work that way. Faith believes before it sees. Faith speaks to the mountain and tells it to move. Faith declares victory even when defeat seems certain. God responds to faith. He honors those who expect Him to show up. That is why Jesus often asks, "Do you believe?" Because belief is the key that opens the door to the miraculous. Expectation creates an atmosphere for God to work. When you come to Him believing that He can turn your situation around, you are making room for Him to do the impossible. Maybe you've been praying for a breakthrough, but doubt has crept in. Maybe the enemy has tried to convince you that God isn't listening. But I want to tell you today, God is faithful. He has heard every prayer. He sees every tear. And He is waiting for you to trust Him completely. Don't let fear steal your faith. Don't let doubt rob you of your miracle. Start believing that God is working even when you don't see it. Start expecting Him to move, because when faith and expectation align, miracles happen, doors open, chains break, and lives are forever changed. If you want to see God move in your life, you must be ready. You must be prepared for the miracle before it arrives. Many people pray for a breakthrough but live as if they don't expect it to come. Faith is not just asking, it is preparing, positioning yourself, and walking in obedience, believing that God is already at work. Look at Noah. God told him a flood was coming, something the world had never seen before. Noah didn't wait for the rain to fall before he started building the ark. He prepared long before the first drop touched the ground. If he had waited, it would have been too late. That is the kind of faith God honors. Faith that moves before the evidence appears. Think about the Israelites marching around Jericho. God told them that the walls would fall, but he required them to walk in obedience first. They had to march before they saw a single brick move. Imagine how foolish it must have looked walking around the city day after day with nothing happening, but they kept marching. They positioned themselves for the miracle before it arrived. And on the seventh day, the walls came crashing down. Maybe today you're asking God to bless your business, to heal your body, to restore your family. But are you preparing for the answer? Are you walking in faith as if the miracle is already on the way? Faith is not passive, it is active. It steps out, it prepares, it makes room for what God is about to do. The widow in 2 Kings had only a little oil left, but the prophet told her to gather as many jars as she could. The amount of oil she received depended on the number of jars she prepared. If she had gathered only a few, her blessing would have been small. But she prepared for abundance, and God filled every jar she brought. If you expect a little, you'll receive a little. But if you prepare for more, God will meet you at the level of your faith. You cannot ask for rain and then refuse to dig a well. You cannot ask God to move while living as if nothing is going to change. God wants to see your faith in action. He wants to see you take steps toward the promise, even when you don't see progress yet. He wants to see you prepare, because preparation is a sign of faith. So what are you believing for today? A new opportunity? A breakthrough in your finances? A restored relationship? Start preparing. Start acting like it's already done. Because when God sees faith in motion, he responds. When he sees you positioning yourself for the miracle, he steps in and does the impossible. Get ready. The blessing is coming. The breakthrough is near. The miracle is on its way. And when it arrives, you'll be glad you were prepared. God specializes in doing the impossible. What seems beyond reach, what looks too broken to fix, what appears too far gone, God can turn it around in an instant. He is not limited by human reasoning. He is not bound by natural laws. He is the God who spoke the universe into existence, who parted the Red Sea, who raised the dead. And he is still the same today. Many people live with small expectations. They believe in God, but they don't truly expect him to move in mighty ways. They pray, but deep down they doubt that anything will change. But I want to tell you today, God is calling you to believe for the impossible. He is calling you to prepare your heart for something greater than you have ever imagined. In the Bible, there was a man named Abraham. God promised him a son, even though he and his wife Sarah were well past the age of having children. The promise seemed impossible, but Abraham believed God. Even when years passed with no sign of a child, he did not waver in his faith. And when the time was right, Sarah gave birth to Isaac. God kept his word because he is faithful. Think about Peter walking on water. No human being can step out onto the waves and stay afloat. But when Jesus told Peter to come, he stepped out in faith, and for a moment, he walked on the impossible. The only thing that caused him to sink was doubt. The moment he took his eyes off Jesus and focused on the storm, fear overtook him. That is a lesson for all of us. If you believe God for the impossible, you must keep your eyes on him, not on your circumstances. When Lazarus died, his family thought it was over. They had seen Jesus heal the sick, but now it was too late. Lazarus was gone, buried for 4 days. They had faith that Jesus could heal, but they struggled to believe that he could raise the dead. And yet when Jesus stood before the tomb and called Lazarus forth, death itself had to release him. That same power is still working today. The God who raised Lazarus is the same God who can resurrect your broken dreams. The God who parted the Red Sea is the same God who can make a way for you. He is not changed. He is still the God of the impossible. What are you believing for today? A healing the doctors say won't happen? A financial breakthrough when all doors seem closed? A family member who seems too lost to ever return? Get ready, because God is about to do what only He can do. Do not limit God with small thinking. Do not doubt what He can accomplish. He is greater than your situation, bigger than your struggle, stronger than your enemy. If you will believe, if you will stand in faith, you will see Him move in ways that will leave you in awe. Get ready, because the impossible is about to become possible.